Okay, good morning, everybody. On this, I'm assuming it's hopefully a sunny day where you guys are on this lovely Wednesday. Welcome to our Microsoft Cloud Bootcamp Education session 1 today. This is the first session in a series of 3. As you would have signed up for the series, you would have received session details for number 1, 2, and 3 that are taking place in August, on the 7th and 21st of August. But today we're going to be focusing on session 1, which is about migration, which is around the first 3 steps of a data and AI roadmap that we have developed, that we're going to try and explain to you and help you understand about how it can help you achieve an end goal, which we've spoken to many IT leaders before in education, which is around a shared common goal, which is to modernize data estate to be able to use AI and other AI tools as part of your education organization. But we identify that a challenge is kind of to understand where you are on this journey, what steps you need to take to get to your destination at the end. And with our 7-step roadmap guide, we can help you do that. As part of the call today, we kind of taken a different approach. This isn't your bog standard webinar. We've set it up as a community call. So essentially you guys we wanted to go approach with a Teams call event. So you guys can have the option. You don't have to sit there on camera throughout the call, but if you have a question through any point in the conversation, Richard is leading the discussion today about these first 3 steps. But any point that you have a conversation or you'd like to join in discussion or have a question, raise your hand, the little raise hand button at the top in the Teams call here. And one of us will call out and you can either type your question in or let us know out loud by turning your mic on. And any one of us here would be happy to help you answer that question. Just to let you know, this session is being recorded. So we can share that out with you guys afterwards. And as well, we are also using M365 Copilot in the background that will help to create summaries and key discussion points from today that we can share with you as well. So move on to the next slide, please. So just a tiny bit of background as to who we are. For some of you, you may have heard about Cloud Direct, but for many of you that are joining us today, you may think we don't know who these people are. So in general, we are a Microsoft Solutions partner, and we're one of the fastest growing ones in the UK. And more specifically, we strive to deliver fast and secure cloud solutions that can help transform and grow your educational organization or any business across any industries. So one very weird fact, you may have noticed our hedgehog logo. His name is Eric, long decided before I joined the business. But just a bit of background about Eric. He kind of embodies our ethos as an organization as to who we are at Cloud Direct. It's inspired by an ancient Greek poem where a hedgehog tirelessly outwits a cunning fox's traps by quickly rolling to a spiky ball, making him impenetrable. This efficient act is one thing he does brilliantly, and we take that as an ethos at Cloud Direct. And that's what we do, is one thing brilliantly, and that is Microsoft Cloud Solutions and Services. We help to provide cloud services that quickly, easily, and securely transform your business so that it remains protected and prepared for whatever comes its way. Next slide, please, Richard. And talking of doing one thing brilliantly, we are committed solely to Microsoft, and we expand this ethos into our relationship with them. As one of the UK's fastest growing Microsoft partners, between our advanced specializations, partner solution designations, and being a member of the elite category of Azure Expert MSPs, we are in the top 1% of Microsoft partners globally in the world. This means our customers benefit from exclusive perks like direct access into advanced Microsoft support and funding for assessments and migration projects, which means better support, broader offerings, and closer partnerships. So without further ado, I will hand over to Richard. But before I do that, you may see some faces along the top here from Microsoft and Cloud Direct, who is on the call today. We have a range of experts, all of these people that are here on the call that are ready to help answer questions, join in with discussions, anything you may have about any of the conversations or topics throughout the call that Richard talks about. So please feel free to just kind of put your hand up at any point and we can help you answer your question joining the discussion with us today, because that's what we wanted to achieve from today. We wanted to make this a two-way discussion between yourselves as IT leaders in education organizations and between us as Microsoft Cloud experts to kind of understand what your challenges are and what your priorities are, so we can come to a kind of consensus in terms of where you want to go and how we can help you be there. So yeah, it's great to have you all join us today. We're excited to be doing this. I'm happy to hand over to Richard Cheney, who can introduce himself, and we can get started. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. All right, so obviously we've got a number of people here from both Cloud Direct and from Microsoft on the call. So like I say, don't be shy in coming forward. If you've got any questions, please do put your hand up. Please post things into the chat, and we'll actively monitor those and pull you into those conversations. We've also got a few slides as we go through where you might need your phones out to be able to hop onto the QR codes and answer. I'll call one of those in a second, just so we can get some interaction going with this. We've got some good content to walk through slide-wise in terms of how to approach migrations with this, but it's really important for us to understand where you're coming from, because really we're here to make you successful, and that's a big part of what we're going to do. So just to introduce myself, I'm the practice lead here at Cloud Direct. Prior to joining Cloud Direct, I was also a cloud solution architect at Microsoft for several years as well, and I've worked in IT for longer than I care to mention. Right. So we're going to start with one of those slides. Obviously, there's a good number of you in the call today. This is the first, as Adam said, in a series of sessions that we'll be running. So this is part of that. We'll see the steps and actually which bits we're covering today. But if you'd like to scan the QR code just to give us some information about what you're looking for from today. You know, what is the reason why you're joining today's session, why you're joining the series as a whole. If you can put some information in there just about what you're looking to do, then we'll surface that. Again, it's really important for us to understand how you're going to be successful individually, how your organizations will be successful. We'll cover that on the next slide as well. And then we can use some of that to help tailor the information we're going to talk through to make sure that it's going to be pertinent to you and your business and your organizations. Okay, so I'll give you a couple of minutes just to add into that. Yeah, I think cloud cost is going to be a common thing that we're here today. We know that everybody in the education sector is under a level of financial pressure. So I'm assuming that cost optimization is going to be front and center for a lot of you. Any more for any more? Yeah, obviously Azure is one of the key parts of the overall Microsoft Cloud. So hopefully we'll give you some key information which will help you around Azure. There's a lot of Azure to learn, if we're honest. And likewise, if you're looking at the Microsoft Cloud more broadly, if you're looking at Microsoft 365, Entra ID, other Power Platform and Dynamics 365 as well, there's a whole breadth of functionality that can help your business come together. We will touch on Microsoft funding and what that means. So we'll touch that a little bit later, how we leverage some of that with the incentive programs we belong to. Yeah, I think that's an interesting one about cloud and when to remain on premise. We're seeing a lot of organizations taking a hybrid approach. We'll touch on that because there's a great extension capability of what you can do if you're looking to change how you manage systems by leveraging Azure Arc, which extends the control plane from Azure to help with some of the operational and security and monitoring and everything else you want to do. And that last one there is bang on message, how to create the migration roadmap with AI in mind. That's definitely the aim of the series, so you're in the right place. That's good. All right, I'll leave those. We'll collect a few more of those as we go through, but I'm going to move on to the next slide now. It'll allow me to do that. Okay, so we're using the term organization as a general thing here, but obviously if you're school, LEA, university, whichever step you're coming from, what specifically does your organization want to achieve over the next year? I'm assuming some of those are going to be mirroring some of what we saw on the previous slide as well. But if there's anything specific which is going to fall into that and show you as being successful, then that'll be good to know. So we're going to focus on cloud. We're going to focus on adopting cloud, hybrid, AI, getting ready for AI. Yeah, that's flicking forward. Okay. Right, I'm going to skip forward, starting that one. But yeah, feel free to add some information into there and we'll feed that in. Adam, if you can pull that information out, that'd be great. When I'm clicking on all responses, it's just moving on to the next slide for me. Okay, right. So this is the 7 steps that we've put together to show a good way of adopting AI with data front and center in what you're doing. So here's one of the key things. If you look at some of the AI functionality, and obviously from the Microsoft perspective, then talking about the different co-pilots is central to what we're talking about. Then there's different levels of adoption of those. If you're just looking to extend the functionality, and I say just, if you're looking to extend the functionality of the tooling that you're using on a regular basis, then making use of the co-pilots which are embedded into those products is a key thing to do. So as an example, Microsoft 365, taking the Microsoft Copilot for M365, it's going to give you all that functionality in terms of what we're doing today, getting summarizations for your Teams meetings or getting information about Microsoft Graph and putting everything you're doing with your documentation together. So a lot of additional functionality comes there, but there's also a whole host of other Copilots which sit in other areas, such as making use of Copilot for GitHub, for coders, making use of Copilot for security, for other areas as well that basically extends that functionality. But there's another area which is really about embedding Copilots in your data or getting deeper with what you're doing with AI. So that middle area there in terms of how you're working with Copilots to get a better understanding of your data, to really surface information, if it's knowledge bases or procedures that you have within your organization. If it's delving into data at that level, then there's a lot more you can do in terms of grounding your AI strategy in the data that you have. So this is really where we're focusing today in terms of if you're going to make use of AI from the standard Copilots through to customizing those to your own businesses and your processes, then having your data in the cloud is step 1 really for that. So the more you migrate into the cloud, the more you then shape that in terms of how your data applications work and how you govern your data within the cloud, how you handle things like sensitivity labeling and access to that data is going to feed into how you then do data analysis and AI strategy. So that's the broader picture about where we're heading to with this. To get to step 7, you really need to get the groundwork in place and get that foundation in place. So today we're going to, in the first of these sessions, cover off on the first 3 steps, if you like. So how do you migrate into the cloud? How do you optimize your cloud? And cost is going to be front and center for what we talk about there for this sector. And then security considerations. How do you make sure that you do that sensibly as well? Happy to take some questions about what that means in a hybrid sense as well. And then if you join us for the second and third sessions, then the second one's going to cover on steps 4 and 5 in terms of data applications, data strategy, governance around data to make sure you're in the right place to then do the data analysis and AI strategy for when you're doing innovative applications and really making use of what we can do with generative AI and historical cognitive AI functionality. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a good overview as to where we're heading with this. So if we look at education and why different educational organizations are embracing the cloud, then we see a couple of key themes coming through with that. So obviously Microsoft 365, particularly in the education sector, has been a massive success. So being able to make use of tooling such as Microsoft Teams, particularly when we went through the COVID period where A lot of remote learning is happening. I know that's still the case for certain university organizations as well, where you need to be flexible as to where your students are. Then remote learning, collaboration, everything at that level works really well when you're making use of Microsoft 365. So making use of standard Copilot makes sense there. Grounding it in your data makes even more sense. If you're dealing with legacy IT systems, so moving on to the second bullet point here, then this is a theme that we see common to all organizations. So dealing with, if you like, legacy ways of working, historical debt, and historical systems, organizations are looking to move into the cloud because that's where they see the innovation happening. That's where they see themselves elevating how they work to move away from hardware and firmware and power and cooling and making use of IaaS services, servers and things like that, to move in something where it's as a service. So when we work with organizations to work through the portfolio of services they're using to help deliver what they need to deliver within those education organizations, then it's really making sure that you've got that approach to taking, adopting SaaS wherever possible and elevating how you're working. That happens when you start adopting cloud. So difficulties with that are things like understanding how you're then going to retrain or address the skills gap. And that's part of what we look at here. So we'll talk about that when we talk about the cloud adoption framework. Another key part of it is making sure you don't lose control over costs. So making sure that the cost optimization is effective is really important. I'm going to argue against on this slide here. I don't think you can always guarantee there's going to be cost savings. What you can guarantee is that the tooling is there to make sure that you manage your costs effectively and make the most of that. And that comes through to right sizing, it comes through to using flexible services, but more so it comes to moving towards PaaS services wherever possible, because that tends to be where we see the biggest impact in terms of improving that. Likewise, economies of scale is really important. So there's nothing worse than seeing utilization for most servers out there being way too high. So if you look at the average utilization of a virtual machine on premises, then it's well under 10%. So normally between 5 to 8% is how utilized a server is. There's a lot of functionality in the cloud which enables you to right size. So if you find that your system's too big, you can put it down to the right size. Key part of cost optimization. Likewise, if you want to be able to scale your services, then you can do that. So if you know you're going to be bursting and hitting it hard, say for a university when it comes to the sign-on period for the early part of the first semester, then that's something that you can take on and make sure the systems are going to scale up to that, but then reduce down where you don't need to be as big. So again, making sure that the IT is fitting the purpose that's there to deliver rather than the other way around. So much more strategic in the way you're operating. Likewise, heading towards AI is really important. Heading towards making better use of your data generally is all important. So where we've had historic silos and a lot of dark data, the ability to use AI and generative AI is really putting a focus and a spotlight on how we actually manage that data. So with all the tooling in terms of giving governance, visibility, labeling, sensitivity, handling things like data exfiltration, there's a whole host of functionality in there which is going to help you as organizations really harness the value of your data and then feed that into what we do with AI. Okay, right, so got a slightly simpler one to use here as well. Hopefully it's going to come through a little bit easier as well. Got some top 3 IT priorities. If you again click on what you see on the left-hand side there, let's get the QR code up and running. And if you can select which one of those is important to you, then hopefully we'll see the graphs on here start filling up as you start responding to those. This is the first time we've used forms within this in this way, so it's some would say brave to do this in a presentation first time around, but we're feeling brave.
Hi, Richard. You should be able to scroll up and down the responses, maybe, so we can kind of, there you go. So we see what's coming up.
Okay, so streamlining is coming out fairly strongly. I think that's a nod to what I said earlier about legacy operations. There's a lot to managing existing infrastructure. So being able to get to a level of operational excellence and elevating how you work is part of what the cloud gives you. Migration being key, optimization. I'm going to take the in terms of how you optimize your environment and make use of that. There's, again, some fantastic tooling. We'll talk about the well-architected framework a little bit later on and how that's really key to making sure that you are optimizing the workloads that sit within the platform management that we'll talk about. So we'll paint that picture. Okay, and security coming through as well. Good. All right. Thank you for responding to that. Okay, so I think we saw from the previous slide, there's a myriad of different reasons why organizations adopt the cloud in the first place, and that is very common. So we see a number of different things coming through, from critical business events to different migration motivations and the requirement to really innovate as well. So we'll start with some of the top ones. Usually when it comes to some of the critical business events, there is something which is driving the timing of what needs to happen. So we're talking, look at these compelling events to see what is going to be a key motivation to make it happen. One of those could be a data center lease. So if that's coming up to an endpoint and you want to move out of the data center, then that is something that we can facilitate to make sure you're meeting those times. We also see it with different, say here, mergers, acquisitions, or divestiture. We're working with a number of different organizations in that space as well, less so in the education sector. But the third one is definitely key. So looking for a reduction in capital expenses. We're seeing the cost of running systems in on-premises rise. We know that people are looking to move towards something which has a lower carbon footprint. We're also seeing some of the costs around licensing, particularly with the Broadcom acquisition of VMware being a good example, where some of those are starting to ratchet up quite noticeably. Like also, as things start gravitating towards the cloud, we're seeing support for older systems starting to drop away. And we know it's a painful thing for you in terms of having to upgrade systems on a regular basis. And it's one of the reasons to start adopting things like PaaS services and SaaS services, because you get to those evergreen states where you're taking something like SQL as a service, means you don't get involved in when a SQL version is going end of life. That's taken care of for you. So a number of different things there. But taking it up a level, regulatory compliance is one of the key things we look at as well. So we've got some great tooling within Azure to help us manage compliance, to show that your resources are compliant, show where they're not compliant, and help you with the tooling to then remediate those resources as well. So if you have got specific requirements around where your data sits, how you handle PII data for your students, what you do in terms of enforcing regulatory compliance when it comes to UK official, then we have the capabilities around that. Okay. Other migration motivations, cost savings. We know that you're under a lot of cost pressure. So that's a big part of making sure that you can move it into a cloud state, which is well managed from a cost perspective. But also the second one's quite key as well. So reducing down that vendor or technical complexity, again, moving up into the PaaS layer can definitely help with that. But even so, just making use of the tooling and everything you have there, you'll see a lot of stuff coming through from Microsoft as a first party offering. Plus, you've got all the integration support from the third parties which are hosted in the marketplace and the others that we work with really closely, which is sort of 1.5, VMware with Azure VMware Service, or if you look at something like NetApp with the NetApp filers. So a lot of those are very tightly integrated with Azure. Lots to do in terms of improving some of the internal operations, and that came through in what you said earlier. So in terms of moving forward, how you operationalize, how you work with your IT portfolios, it's a big part of that. Okay, and lastly, innovation. So obviously the reason why some of you are here and why you're on the series is around AI. How do you leverage AI? How do you adopt that from skipping past the licenses for the embedded side of things? How does it look when you're looking to make use of your data and feeding that into what you do? Something simple such as procedures and standards, or your documentation around how you handle the student community. So if people need to query that information, how do you surface that faster? To much more deeper AI around what you do with the data that you're holding within that. How do you take those disparate silos of information and make sure access to that is appropriate? You've got the right labeling, or controls over release. How do you really visualize all that data together so that you have something like one lake pulling all that together? All right, so we see a number of different things, whether it's 25, 60, and 15, depends on which vertical we talk to, as to what is really the most important thing to. One thing that is the same for all is that as you start heading towards something substantial, then making sure the business is carried with you is absolutely key. So engaging with execs to get stakeholder commitment to what you're doing is absolutely key for success. Making stakeholders successful with a migration like this is how we have successful projects. It's very easy to have a technically successful project which doesn't actually meet the business needs. So if you don't focus on that, you're never really going to be truly successful with it. And that's going to feed into what we do around the total cost of ownership and the financial justification for making the move. It needs to make commercial sense, financial sense to actually work through that. We'll talk through some of the incentives around how you can reduce down your costs in terms of ongoing running costs within Azure, but also we'll touch on some of the operational side and also some of the incentives and assistance coming from Cloud Direct and Microsoft to help you on that journey. Okay. But this really is about taking that wider view beyond just a migration to what is going to be a successful shift in how you operate and work as you move closer into the cloud. Okay. Right, so we have a number of different engagement types where we help reduce the friction. So as you're moving from state A to state B, what does that look like in terms of working through workshops, discovery, setting up a target environment, showing proof of value as you start moving into an environment, and then start executing against that. And some of these points obviously require professional services to make that happen if you're going to be successful with that. So it's a bit of background noise, by the way, Adam, if you can sort that. And we leverage some of the incentive programs that we work with to help with that path. So we're a member of Azure Expert MSPs, which opens a number of doors in terms of some of the incentive programs we work with. We also have a large number of specializations, which means that for different scenarios, in terms of what customers are looking to do around the Azure Migrate and Modernize program and Azure Innovate, then we can feed into those things. I'm just going to hand over at this point so that Microsoft can pitch in and sort of mention some of the things that come from their side as well, which can help kickstart some of those processes.
I may have some background noise, so apologies. Yeah, so I was just going to mention that it's critically important that we engage early in conjunction with you guys and understand what that estate is looking like. So we want to potentially fund a assessment of the estate, which would be critical to get a rounded view of what workloads that you may want to move, your Linux VMs, your SQL VMs, what's that going to look like in terms of a roadmap, and then we can fund that in conjunction with Cloud Direct, nominate them, and then outline that piece across to help you create a business case. Then following that, articulating what that resulting Azure consumption is going to be over the first year, and then we'll allocate a portion of that back to the professional services piece to make sure that the journey to your cloud journey is comprehensive, but also falls in line with that business case that we've created. So we've got the Azure Migrate and Modernize piece, which will take advantage of the relevant t-shirt sizes in terms of what that engagement is going to look like. So just to touch back on jumping on that piece with us early is really, really critical. So we need to engage, articulate it quickly with Cloud Direct, or the partner of your choice, and but specifically Cloud Direct are a well stocked in terms of the requirements and the certificates needed for this piece. So and then we can map that out. So yeah, that's it from me. Thanks a million.
Yeah, thanks, Chip. Okay, so yes, absolutely. The key thing is to get engaged early so that we can really pull the levers and make the best use that we can of the different incentive programs just to ease the path for you as much as possible. And we do work really closely with Microsoft and the different programs and the different people within the organization to make that happen. All right, we're going to step through some of the key things that we have seen working with a number of different organizations and helping them to migrate to the cloud to make them successful. And the true and honest answer is that the technology is the least of it. So what really makes customers successful when they move into the cloud is understanding how that changes their operating. So today you'll have an operating model if you are on premises, if you're working with a colo or your own data center, in terms of what you look after within that data center, which other providers, from the heating, the cooling, from those who help you with provisioning racks, to doing different services on those, to the third parties that you work with them from a software perspective, other partners you work with from a hardware deployment perspective. There's going to be a different ecosystem that you have there, and a different level of split responsibility in terms of what you do today, in terms of how you're operating. And the people that you have within your own IT departments will have a certain set of skills which are going to be leveraging around that. As you move towards the cloud, then obviously making use of the people that you have and changing what that cloud operating model, understanding what that shift looks like, is really key. So you want to make sure that you're hitting everything you talked about earlier in terms of governance and compliancy, achieving security, making sure you're operating efficiently. So actually changing how you work within the cloud, and then working with different organizations like ourselves and obviously Microsoft for some of the backend services around what that split responsibility model looks like, is a key part to adopting a cloud operating model. So those who focus on what that target cloud operating model state looks like as they move over are the ones who are going to find that successful. This isn't something where you think, I'm here and I immediately need to be here. So it's going to be one of those things that as you move through it, there's going to be a ramp up in terms of skills and capabilities. And this is something we see quite commonly in terms of leveraging partners until those skills have been built up, and have a real focus on really addressing that skills gap. And the organization restructuring to help with some of that is where we see some of the largest organizations be successful, but also filters down to some of the smaller ones as well. Okay. We'll be talking about something around the platform. So we'll be talking about the platform, and just looking at the one at the bottom left there, about the platform and how you manage the platform and the overall governance and security, and apply some of those guardrails to your environment, plus some of the key shared services. So things like identity management, and what you have with the core networking, which is then going to be leveraged by the individual workloads and the services that you have attached to those. So that you'll see that structure as we work through. We'll see that framework in place and how that looks. Some of the key things that we see being really key when you're moving into the cloud, which may be different to what you have today, and some of you will be in a different part of this journey to others. One is making sure that the cloud shift is really aligned with the strategy, the business strategy. So as the organization says, this is what we want to achieve by moving into the cloud, that needs to be front and center in terms of what you're doing when you're looking at the model. Secondly, cloud commercials. There's obviously a shift in terms of how you look to optimize your costs, but also for those of you who are looking at very much a CapEx model today and a refresh period for anything you have on premises, life changes when you move into cloud and you start working with OpEx. And that can be a little bit of a shift for certain procurement departments and finance departments, but understanding how that works and how it feeds through is important to make sure you're going to be successful in that, not just from day one, but day two onwards. Architectural concepts, a lot of those are actually very familiar, and you'll see a lot of what you are used to from on-premises being reused for key IaaS definitions within Azure, but there's obviously going to be slight variance on that, and we will help step through some of those as we go through different engagements. But also you suddenly open up a whole wealth of different functionality in terms of PaaS and SaaS services that you can adopt, and new architectures which are more cloud native in style. So as you look at lifting and shifting and replatforming what you have in terms of adopting into the cloud, then you'll probably look for different opportunities in terms of where you can really replatform onto something which is more PaaS focused in terms of what you're doing, or re-architecting an application if you need something to really work substantially differently. You know, containerization, microservices, PaaS databases. So there's a whole host of things there which feed into really well-architected ways of working with new applications in the cloud, or taking old applications and refreshing them for 2024. Innovation control comes into that. So we have some key guardrails in place to make sure that you are unleashing the velocity of innovation that you can do on the platform without losing control and without losing all the compliance and security that comes with that. So we'll talk about some of the landing zone approaches that we do with that. And the other key thing, which I think is really important for the operating model, is it is iterative. So starting up with incipient structures around how you reorganize or how to look at what your teams can do, treat that as a first step. And then if you look at saying, okay, what's important next, you can start iterating on that and growing that. So we see this with applications, we see this with teams, we see this with people's skill levels. It's really, what do we need to get going? And then how are we going to essentially have our own roadmap for where we're going to head with that? So that's why I like the iterative approach for that. Okay, and this kind of feeds into everything that comes from the cloud adoption framework. So we're going to talk through 3 key things within this section. All have 3-letter acronyms. So we've got the cloud adoption framework for how you adopt cloud and the framework to approach that as an engagement ongoing. We also have the Azure landing zone. So when we look at ready, so looking at that third blob as you move along, it mentions Azure landing zones there. This is a particular bit of opinionated IP coming from Microsoft to help set yourself up with the best practice in terms of a target environment to migrate into. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the well-architected framework. So going outside of general good practice for platform and configuration for that, what does it look like when you look at individual workloads? So those individual workloads that then get migrated into that, what are the different pillars you're going to be looking at to assess those and then really work out how you're going to design that application to make it appropriate to what you need as an organization. Okay, so I'm just going to very quickly step through some of the key things we see within each of these around how you define the strategy at that business level and making sure that, again, that TCO, that cloud economics case is made. How does that then feed into how you plan? How do you assess your estate? How do you assess your people and organization to see how you are going to adopt cloud and make yourself successful in that adoption? That then feeds through into making sure that your target environment is right. How do you get ready for that? How do you make sure that you've done those initial bits of addressing the skills gap to get the right things in place so that you are ready for those day 2 operations? How do you work with partners and how do you work with Microsoft to get over those initial steps? And then when it comes to adopting the workloads, when you're migrating existing workloads in or you're doing net new applications within Azure, what's the right way to design, build, deploy those workloads to make sure that you've got that operational excellence, that you've got that cost optimization you're looking for? So in terms of that left to right flow, in terms of making yourself successful, that's where the cloud adoption framework really comes in. But all of that is designed so that you are ready to operate going forward. So looking at the bottom level, governance, management, and security, making sure you've got those guardrails in place that you can prove compliancy and achieve compliancy, that you can avoid unexpected cost increases and other things like that by having good cost management around it is really important, as is really changing how you manage and operationalize your support on those systems. And security feeds into everything. It came through in some of the requirements earlier. So designing security into your platform generally, into what you're looking at with your applications and how you maintain that baseline and achieve a strong security posture is really important. And again, there's some great tooling within the Microsoft portfolio to help you with all of these things. Okay, so again, coming back to that shift in the cloud operating model, got another little QR code here thing. So just want to see which of those things that we touched on in the previous slides resonate with you and some of what you're thinking about. You know, what keeps you up at night when you're thinking about, okay, if we move into cloud, what are going to be the biggest challenges for me as an organization? I don't know if the high numbers for the reliability of new cloud tech has been influenced by what happened with CrowdStrike on Friday. So. That's really useful. All right, so again, cost is coming through strong, as we'd expect. So we'll talk about some of the cost considerations and also some of the levers you can leverage as you move through that. So I'll touch on those a little bit later when we talk about the well-architected frameworks. I think that's going to be the right place to talk about some of those things. The skilled personnel is something that we work with our customers quite strongly with. So the cloud operating model is really key to us. We've got some really skillful professional services. We have a range of different managed services we can use with customers. And what we find is that customers are really reflecting on where they want to play. Where do they want to leverage their people to make the best use of what they know, about the business. Okay, so it's taken away some of the less valuable areas where if it's just around maintenance of the systems or key operational considerations, they're thinking, okay, what can we out-task? What isn't important to us? You'll see as you adopt IaaS and PaaS anyway, there's a whole host of functionality which shifts over to Microsoft because they'll look after calling, firmware, all those kind of pieces you see there. But there's more that can be out-tasked as well. So it gives a good chance to really step back and say, what do we want to be in charge of ourselves? Where do we want to leverage our people and where do we use those? And once you've got that established and actually working out where those skills gaps are as part of that. So does that come back down to technical training with third parties to go through standard accreditation type paths? Or is it something where we have the mantra of train, don't, teach, don't learn, sorry, teach, don't sell, rather, I'll spit it out in a second, in terms of how we work with our customers who are looking to become more enabled on what we are deploying for them into the environments. So we work at that level as well. Cost and budget constraints is really key. So leveraging some of the savings, but also getting the controls in place, such as preventing the deployment of really expensive services or high-level SKUs, or setting quotas in place for budgetary purposes. Understanding how to get the important information out of the cost management systems is really important. Okay. Step forward. The integration with other systems, it'd be useful actually to see what considerations people are thinking of there. So maybe you put some information into the chat window if that's okay. All right, so we'll go back to the strategy piece. So I won't spend too long on this because I think we touched on quite a few key things here. But again, this is really comes down to understanding not what needs to be done, but why it needs to be done. And I had a mantra from a previous boss who basically said, if you really want to understand how an organization is going to be successful, you need to ask why probably 5 times to get the real understanding for what needs to happen. So getting away from a migration project to what is going to be successful for the organization and making this what are the desired business outcomes, what is driving that cloud adoption, means you've got the context, it means you have the stakeholders, it means you have the motivations, and you understand what needs to be, what the outcome needs to be for that to be a successful thing. So that then feeds into everything that then happens at that level. One of the key things is going to be financial consideration. So understanding what that looks like with the total cost of ownership and how you transition over and being able to show a picture of what it looks like once you get to the other side is really key for driving success there. Plan then kind of falls out of that. So I've got a few key things in place. We've talked about rationalizing the digital estate. We see this quite strongly. You'll find if you're looking at what you have on premises today and you think about migrating, that a couple of the key things come into play when you look at the 5 Rs. So when you look at retiring systems, we see this happening quite a lot. A big chunk of what you have there, you won't need when you migrate into the cloud, either because it's a good time to clean house, or they're supporting systems which you no longer need because actually that kind of comes with the platform in the first place. You also have the opportunity to shift what you can into SaaS offerings from Microsoft, third parties, whatever makes sense to really minimize your overall digital estate and make it sensible to do. So we see a lot of organizations rationalizing that way and then working out what needs to be lifted and shifted, what needs to be rehosted on a slightly different platform. So is it a server which is hosting IaaS, which would be better as a web app sitting within Azure? Is it a SQL database where actually you want to make use of SQL managed instance and take that as a PaaS database? So being able to re-platform to those kind of services is going to reduce down your responsibilities going forward and actually make that skill gap analysis simpler. When it comes to the skills readiness plan, looking at number 3, then it gives an opportunity to really say, okay, where are my people today? What is our skills gap? What do we need to address within that? What does the plan look like? And we can help you with that process. And that feeds into the cloud adoption plan. But I'm just going to mention about the organizational alignment. And this does depend on how you're organized today as to how it works. And we see a number of different organizations, particularly at larger size, being focused on different towers in technology-wise. So maybe a team that's looking after the core networking, for example. So there is normally an organizational shift in terms of working with the cloud because so much stuff comes together. You want to take those skills, take that experience, but really look for opportunities to expand in different areas. But also, it gives an opportunity to start adopting some of the best practice we see for other organizational structures. So I'm going to just lean into the part we talked about around compliancy just for a second. So one of the structures that we see as being a good and sensible way of adopting compliancy well is having a separation of duties around the cloud adoption team and the cloud governance team. So if you have a cloud governance team, this might be one person initially, but somebody who's basically stipulating what compliancy needs to be achieved as you shift into cloud, and therefore what the cloud adoption team needs to feed into, means you have that separation. And that's really important because experience tells us then consolidating those two things so people are governing themselves isn't necessarily the strongest way of doing it. You want to have a separate group of people who are responsible for enforcing that in the first place, and another team that's adopting, using it, but reporting in to show how they're meeting that compliancy requirement, how they're addressing any existing non-compliant resources that need remediation. So, and this is a moving target, right? So as cloud governance shifts over time and other things feed into it, UK official as an example, will change over time. CIS, the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark, other things that we use as general compliancy is something which you can set initially, but expect to come back to and refresh and update over time. All right, just going to touch on the ready side of things as well. So in terms of setting up a target environment, then historically, there's just a set of guidance from Microsoft as these are sensible and good things to do. But customers came back to Microsoft and said, actually, what we want is something a bit more opinionated from you. Tell us how to do it. So a lot of work went into what is now called the Azure Landing Zone as a set of IPs.
Okay,
set up a good...
Cheers, mate.
Yep.
Final.
Sorry, what was that? Nope. Okay. In terms of setting up a good structure in terms of a target environment. So how do you organize management groups and set policy guardrails for those? How do you set standard RBAC assignments? How do you separate out your core shared platform from your workloads and from your sandpit areas for where your developers want to work individually, and just structure things for online versus internally accessed applications or anything else which governance determines that you should structure in a certain way. So having that plus the shared services around identity and everything else is part of what that platform service looks like. So I won't go into too much detail for that, but it's really to get you set up for success. So to make sure you're organizing your resources well, you're making use of tagging, you're making use of the access to those systems with role-based access control, you're monitoring, you're managing costs, you're handling quotas, you're updating systems, and you've got all the tooling in place to meet what you need to do around governance and security. So with this, we make use of the Azure Landing Zone Accelerator. We make use of the Azure Landing Zone. We can do that manually via the portal or more commonly with Terraform coming from either GitHub Actions or Azure DevOps. There are two preferred ways of deploying ourselves. You've got a lot of flexibility as to how to do that, but it gives you an ability to then have a target environment ready to start migrating your workloads into. Okay, so that's Cloud Adoption Framework and Azure Landing Zone very quickly. Okay, so once you've got a good target environment, you've done your planning, you've been assessing your workloads, what you're going to do with those, you've got that mapping activity, you've got the waves established, then it's really just going through that standard migration project to say, okay, which applications are going to work together. There's a lot of great tooling from Microsoft to help with this as well. So as a framework, we make use of Azure Migrate and the projects that creates, which essentially does an assessment and then enables a migration. We usually make use of the first-party tooling that's baked into that, but we can make use of third-party tooling as well if you've got a requirement for that. But it means we can assess the workloads. We can look at those virtual machines, we can look at those standalone physical servers, we can talk to Hyper-V, we can talk to VMware vSphere or other hypervisor platforms, and we can get good information about how busy those machines are, what they're likely to map over to if you want to do as is, or much better recommendation, right size to the right target size, and also which systems are talking together. So if you know that from the information put out from, say, VMware vSphere, that a specific set of servers are very chatty with each other, then it makes sense to group those and migrate those together so that they remain chatty when they're in the cloud. Whole host of tooling, this is a very well-trodden path for us in terms of how we do that, and then basically get to the point where we're doing acceptance testing and acceptance into service, and then basically passing over control for day 2 operations to whichever team is looking after it, if it's within the customer or within our managed services. Okay, I'm going to talk about the well-architected framework in a minute, but it'll be useful just to get a feel for how well acquainted you are with the well-architected framework. For those of you who are multi-cloud, and I know some of you will be, you'll be working with AWS, GCP, OCI and others. The well-architected framework is very similar between the various different clouds. But it'd be worth just dipping into this just so you can see what we mean by well-architected framework and assessing different workloads. All right. Good. I'm getting the feeling I'm not going to be boring too many people with the next couple of slides. That's good. All right. So all of you will be used to how you architect your applications today if you're running on, say, something like a hypervisor such as VMware vSphere. You know, when you've got one or more virtual machines sitting together and you're fronting access to those and you're making sure they're highly available, you're making sure that they are recoverable, you're making sure that they're backed up so you can recover those systems, or if something goes down that it's going to fail over to a different host, to a different data center, you understand how that looks from an architectural point of view. You understand how much it's going to cost you. You understand what it means in terms of operating that, how you deal with templates, how you work with monitoring those systems and everything around that. So really, this is making sure that you are going to be addressing all those things as you move into working with Azure or working with cloud generally. So the pillars that we talk about when we're talking about well architected are the ones in the middle. Okay, so reliability, which comes into availability, it comes into BCDR to make sure that you recover from different scenarios, including whole data center failures or regional issues. If you want to look at it from that perspective, it means you're looking at cost optimization, making sure it's applicable to what you're doing, how you work the systems, how you deploy applications, update applications, how you monitor applications, everything around operational excellence. How you look at performance efficiency, how do you make it so that it is appropriately performant? Is it something where you need to have maximum performance because latency and speed is absolutely paramount? Is it something where scalability for that is really key? Is it something where it just needs to be good enough in terms of the performance levels that it does? And then what do you need to meet in terms of security, particularly for those applications which are externally facing? What does that look like? One of the key things here is that you cannot make all 5 of those pillars maximized. Okay, so one of the things we look at when we look at well architected is we do certain things which obviously apply to the whole platform. We like to make sure that we have general recommendations in force so that if something is a sensible thing to switch on, like transparent data encryption, say for SQL databases, that's done at scale and it's done for everything. Okay, so that's easy stuff to pick off if you like. The more interesting areas when you look at individual applications, you think, okay, if it's something where it is pivotal to what you're doing and it needs to be really fast, it needs to scale well, it needs to be recoverable because it's important that it never goes down, you'll be focused on reliability, you'll be focused on operational excellence and performance and security of the application. Your cost will be driven up. Okay, so if you make something so it's more HA, if you're doing recoverability in different areas, if you're backing it up and you're making sure it can be recovered into a different region, there will be more cost related to that, but it'll be more reliable. So you have these trade-offs, natural trade-offs between the different pillars, depending on what you are configuring for that. So the key thing is to look at the individual applications, the individual workloads, and assess that from an architecture perspective to make sure that what you're defining in terms of reliability, cost optimization, operational excellence is something where you're taking the overall recommendations which apply to all workloads, and you're looking at individual workloads to see where those trade-offs are, what is appropriate to your workload and to your organization. So that's really what the well-architected is. We do that when we look at workloads moving into the cloud and net new applications, or those where you want to return to it and, as you said, iteratively improve where you are. So there's some great tooling such as Azure Advisor baked into what we do within the environment, also other things like Secure Score, which sit within things like Azure Defender for Cloud, where we can get good assessments and recommendations to feed into what we do as part of our managed services or our professional service engagements to help customers achieve a better security stance or a better level of well architected in terms of making sure it's right for you and for that application. Okay, so that comes in some of the recommendations we see coming out of the Architecture Center, what we see coming out of Azure Advisor, doing those reviews and really going through that process to get you so you are in the right place. We're seeing a big focus at the moment around reliability and security in both those areas there, just to make sure that when it comes to recoverability, when it comes to making sure access to systems, there is a lot of activity, as you well know, around cybersecurity, and the impact of that can be really damaging to your operations, to your services and what you do. So making sure that you tick those boxes whilst keeping an eye on the cost optimization is getting that right balance for the right applications. So that's why it's important. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, just going to touch on security because security kind of changes a little bit when you move into the cloud. So it's worth thinking about certain key things within that. One of those, and you'll see this already, when you start moving out of a data center, when you start moving out of that traditional cloud security, perimeter security type approach to what you'd have within, say, a data center or within an office attached to something, or campus attached to a data center, we now have users accessing systems from different locations, different places, and actually those back-end systems are more distributed than ever. We talked about hybrid scenarios. We talked about cloud generally. So doesn't mean that perimeter security, network security isn't important. We've got a lot of tooling around that to get good operations around that and making sure you're doing that. But really, as you move to a zero trust model, the key thing is around access control. It's around who's got the right permissions in terms of authorization and authenticating onto systems in the first place to make sure that you have got strong authentication. You're making use of MFA, you're making use of the right factors as well as we start moving towards things like passkeys for access into systems, making sure that's appropriate to how your users work and they've got fast tooling to be able to get access to the systems without putting barriers in place, but making sure that it's secure in doing so. So there's a lot of functionality around access control, which is baked into how Enter ID as an identity provider works and how things like continuous access can, not continuous access, I've got myself confused with something else there. Conditional access, then has the right rules to basically test when you're authenticating to different situations and making sure that it's requesting for those secondary factors of authentication when required. So a whole different host of identity and network controls to make sure the right people are getting access to the right systems at the right times. And again, we help you with the design and architecture for those areas. The other key thing is around security operations. So it's best to assume breach and that at some point you will have been breached or you are currently breached. Okay, so understanding that you can detect those systems, you can respond for those, you recover those is really important. So from Azure Defender for Cloud through to what we do with individual workloads, we extend that functionality from servers to databases to containers to whole raft of different workloads we have there, and then feeding through to other systems like Microsoft Sentinel, which gives you that ability to really manage different events and then automate the response to those, means that you have something which then feeds into that. And this comes back into Microsoft being one of the largest, probably the largest security organization in the world, in terms of having all those points of information which help them detect different things and taking that intelligence and all the AI into how you correlate and make sense of the huge amount of signals that are coming through. So this is why the threat intelligence sharing and everything that gets baked into the tooling is really important to help you with your security operations. And again, this is an area where we see a great deal of out-tasking from certain customers, where for some, they want to really focus on that. It's really key to their business and they want to make use of the tooling themselves. For others, that's not where their strength is and it's not where they've got the skills, and they see benefit in taking that out to a third party to basically out-task some of that. All right, asset protection. I'm not going to cover too much in this one because we're going to be covering that in the next session in a bit more detail, particularly around data when it comes to data labeling, when it comes to sensitivity, when it comes to data protection when it comes to data loss prevention. There's a whole set of systems there around Purview and other areas, other controls that we have, which enable you to protect your sensitive data. This is going to be really key for those of you who are handling PII data, which obviously if you're dealing with a student population is going to be quite common as to how you manage and protect those assets. It's also something we're seeing being really important when you start moving into AI, because if you start moving with AI and start grounding it into one little walled garden of key data, that's one thing. But if you give it broader access into your environment, what you have hosted within the Microsoft Graph and within the various OneDrives and SharePoint systems, does cast quite a spotlight in terms of how good your current data access, classification, security around that data is, because that AI can suddenly poke holes into different things that it can see on your behalf and maybe expose where you haven't got that configured correctly today. So this is a key part in terms of setting up yourselves in terms of data security and data governance correctly as you start stepping into an AI world. Security governance, your security posture, and giving you the tooling to know what to do to help continuously improve that security posture is a key part of the managed services that you'll be looking at yourself in terms of things like making use of the secure scores you have for Microsoft 365 and for Azure Defender for Cloud in improving your security posture as you shift through. You'll also see a huge amount for those of you who are moving much more into DevSecOps. If you're taking on DevOps processes and baking security into those, it is really important to make sure that you're not suddenly exposing anything which gives attackers a way into your businesses. We have that baked into a lot of what we have already with Azure DevOps and what you see within GitHub, but in terms of making use of the advanced security and prevention of uploaded secrets or scanning of container images or anything at that level, as you get into more cloud native innovation on the platform, is folded into what we do with DevSecOps and making sure that you're making best use of the tooling to protect yourselves going forward. All right, so all this feeds into what we see in terms of management. I'm just going to focus on the darker green area, if you like, the management baseline, because some of the key things that you want to have in place on day one is making sure that you understand what you have within the cloud. It's always a bit of an eye-opener, particularly as we get into assessments, when we're doing the migration assessments in the first place, just how few organizations actually have full visibility and inventory of what they have today. So being able to get yourself well structured in terms of organizing your inventory of services as you land into the cloud, making sure you've got the right tagging in place so you know which are your production workloads, which belong to which applications, which ones belong to which owners, which ones are 24/7, which ones have different backup policies. Anything which helps you organize and structure it enables you to leverage a sensible set of tagging for that. And that comes into things like cost centers and other areas as well. So depending on what you need, there's a right way to start constructing how that looks to make sure that you're well organized from an inventory perspective. And you've got some amazing tools such as Resource Graph and the queries you can do around that to get good information out about everything you've got sitting within the Resource Graph within the system. In terms of operational compliance, this is really where a lot of the guardrails come into play, but also operational processes. So making use of the guardrails you have with Azure Landing Zone will make sure you stay in compliance. And it could be something simple like making sure that your resources only ever get deployed to UK South or UK West. So basically the data centers we have around London or in South Wales. So if UK data residency is key, you can enforce that with some of the guardrails you have in place. And that can extend to a whole different thing in terms of operational compliance. Making sure that when you create a new virtual machine, it automatically gets an extension to help monitoring the data, and it gets associated with the data collection rule to make sure that you're monitoring everything into Defender for Cloud in the right way. So again, operational compliance and excellency baked into how you work. So we can help you with a lot of those processes and make sure it works correctly. But it's also going to be part of how you work. So in terms of what you need to do in terms of regular operations, what does that look like? And how do you get the right people, the right access to be able to do those? And does that come into making use of things like privileged identity management so you can elevate their roles for the period they need to do it? So you've got that, again, least privilege and just-in-time type access to how you work. So a whole host of different things in terms of how you work within the cloud and leveraging some of the services we have within Azure to make you work in the right ways on the platform. Just going to touch on protect and recover, because working within the cloud gives you a whole host of functionality. And I still talk to some people who have a misunderstanding that if they start moving stuff into the cloud, it's going to be automatically protected and they're going to be able to automatically recover it. And it's true that you've got a whole host of services to help you with that, from backup vaults to recovery vaults to making use of highly available systems and the whole range of things we can do around resiliency and reliability. But you need to design your applications to make use of those. If you just move over a single virtual machine, it's not going to be automatically backed up unless you back it up, and then you've got the ability to recover it. So you've got all the controls over that, you've got all the services to enable it, but making sure that you have the right protections to recover from different scenarios is really important for the different workloads you have. It could be something that applies to everything, you use labels for that when you're doing the tagging, or it could be something which is very specific to individual workloads. Okay, and that's really a good starting point. But actually, when you start moving into some of the tighter business alignment or getting more advanced in what you're doing with the baseline services, then again, you can iterate on that and start building that out, or make use of third parties such as ourselves to do so. Okay, all right. So hopefully that's giving you a feel for some of the management perspective. All right. When it comes to governance, I touched on this earlier, but one of the key things is Azure policy, and I'm going to mention this and just turn back a second to what we said earlier about the hybrid scenarios. So we have a whole host of policies that we use to stop you doing the wrong things, to automatically configure the right things, to deploy resources which should be attached to things that you deploy, so we can do that automatically as well. We can automate things like tagging, inheritance, and all sorts of stuff. So there's a whole host of policy we do to make sure that you're in a good place in terms of managing the system. But there's also a specific set of what we call policy initiatives, so sets of policies which are aligned to different compliancy requirements. So if you have that need to make something particularly compliant, we can do that. To give a couple of examples on the security baseline, we use the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark as a standard for saying this is how you secure systems. But if you want to make use of SIS 2.0, or if you want to start moving towards Cyber Essentials, or you're going to go to Cyber Essentials Plus, then we can leverage the different configurations and policy initiatives to help you on your path to achieving those compliance requirements. Likewise, when it comes to what you're doing around cost management, deploying quotas in different areas, working with billing identities and billing profiles, working with CSP generally, and really making sure you don't get those nasty surprises with your cost management billing, then that's a key area we help with. We also have compliancy that we can do, which helps you meet regulatory compliancy requirements. So if you need to meet something like UK official, we have other customers who need to meet UKHS, which is kind of the same set really. But like those who work in PCI DSS, where they've got financial systems and they're holding credit card details, a whole host of different compliances, ISO 27001, to help you as an organization operate effectively. So these will help you by making sure that new resources are configured in a way which is compliant with those compliancy requirements. It will also highlight any existing resources which are non-compliant, so you have the opportunity to then kick off a remediation task to bring it into alignment. And you can also extend that. So talking about hybrid environments, getting that level of governance around things like ISO 27001 and what you're doing with virtual machines in colos and within data centers can be hard. So being able to use something like Azure Arc, which extends the control plane outside of the Azure regions and data centers to your workloads which sit within other clouds or sit within those data centers and colos, means that you can then expand your governance approach and apply that to a wider set of services. So Azure Arc enables you to talk to virtual machines and containers wherever they happen to reside. And it means you can monitor those in the same way. You can do certain controls and management functionality in the same way, update management for patches, for example, or you can use it to enforce certain types of policy more widely as well. So if you've got a requirement to not just make sure you're looking after what you migrate or innovate into the cloud in the right way, but also look at how, well, if you need to remediate and bring into compliancy any resources sitting outside, then some of the tooling with Azure Arc and Azure Policy can help that become a reality. Okay, so I think we've talked quite a lot about compliance and how some of this stuff can help in that space. Again, if there's any specific questions, feel free to post those. Okay, so hopefully that's given you a bit of a feel for what it looks like in terms of the cloud adoption framework. You can see how the strategy fits in with really working with those stakeholders and meeting that business case, meeting those business outcomes to make it successful, setting the context for everything in terms of planning, what you're going to do with the different parts of your portfolios, what's going to be sensible to move into the cloud. Is it everything? Is it a subset? Are you going to be retiring certain things? Are you going to be taking certain workloads and making those PaaS services or SaaS services? And then really working out how you're going to have a target environment and go through that process of migrating into it. So it's really about making you successful within that and getting to a point where the governance, management, and security is at the right point and is not just a set once, but something which is going to be maintained and updated over time as well. So that's the cloud adoption framework. Feeds into Azure landing zones, and we talked about the well-architected framework within that for the workloads. So hopefully those acronyms now mean a little bit more to you as we talk through that. Just going to return to where we started. So we talked about target cloud operating model and some of the key things where as you move into an area where you start mixing in and changing how your people and your process and technology really differs a little bit as you move into the cloud. So we have workshops where we can take your requirements and really drill into that in terms of where you are today and where you want to be as you move into the cloud to help with some of this. So this really comes into some of those initial strategy and planning sessions to make sure we understand where you're heading as an organization. So what needs to be considered, what needs to be incorporated into the designs, into the plan for the project, for the ongoing managed services, for what you need to do, for what you need to do in terms of upskilling in different areas. So really having that session to go into some of these areas, and we right sizes to different types of organization sizes. What is going to be the right outcome for you as an organization? How can we help you get there? So that helps to drill into things like how you configure, how you do change management, how you do identity and access management. What regulatory compliance do you need to achieve? What are you looking for from financial management? All those different areas that we see with the different blocks within this particular slide is part of what we talk about when we go through those workshops. And those customers who work through this are the ones we think are best set up for success as they move towards the cloud. All right, just going to talk a little bit around the cost constraints. So if you want to keep within cost constraints, that's a really key thing. So developing a cost model for that is really important. So understanding what is important about cost is really key. So I'm going to talk about some of the things which we capture within that. We need to break down those high-level goals into different functional requirements for that, and then work out how we keep within those cost constraints. So for the quotas come into it, but also how you provision services. How does that feed into the criteria for going through a well-architected framework review or design? Like I say, there's also cost trade-offs. So if you are looking to really make sure that a specific application or workload is appropriate, you need to understand the trade-offs between when higher availability or recoverability or security. If you keep adding different services onto those, some of those are going to incorporate additional costs. So therefore, it's going to increase the cost of that workload specifically. So it needs to be right in terms of the trade-offs that you make use in that space. And we will have recommendations that we have from Azure Advisor, which says, this is how you make it cheaper. This is how you make it more secure. And we will help you navigate that as you work through. But some of the key things we see in terms of optimizing your costs come into some of the key things we see here. So some of that is right sizing. So if you find that you have moved over a virtual machine, for instance, and it's on a specific SKU, then one of the great things about this is not like buying a physical server. And if you bought one which is a little bit too big because you wanted to make sure you were safe on the headroom, and you got something which is actually a bit over-spec'd, that doesn't matter in the cloud. You can change it to something smaller. So right sizing can happen when we migrate in with Azure Migrate, making recommendations, but you always have Azure Advisor recommending if certain workloads can be reduced down in terms of size. So aggressively right sizing is one of the sensible things to do. If you have something which is scalable, then we always advocate moving towards something where the individual units you're scaling with are as small as possible as well. So if you're using a virtual machine scale set, or if you're using containers with all the scalability within that, then horizontal pod order scaling, that kind of thing, then we will make use of the right size of the individual instances within that as well. But I'm going to talk about licensing and contracting just to make sure that you're fully aware of a couple of key things in that space. So there are a number of things you can do, particularly around virtual machines, and I'll focus on those for the minute in terms of making sure you're cost effective when you're working within the cloud. One of those is making use of reserved instances. So if you have workloads on virtual machines which you know are going to be up 24/7 and they're going to be there for the next several years, then you can make use of reserved instances to reduce your costs. So if you've got something which is a test dev server, you're going to spin it up automatically and run it for 5 hours and then get rid of it, or a couple of days, you would just do pay as you go, because that's going to be the most cost effective way of managing that. If you have a test dev server and it needs to be up during the daytime but off overnight, you can then automate the startup and shutdown for that. So it's really when a machine is up and running and it's what we call allocated, where it's making use, and that's where you see the cost coming through. The disks also cost, but effectively it's that runtime, the compute, which costs you. So for those pay as you go, managing those with, like I said, the right timing for bringing certain systems down for a period can help you achieve lower costs. But if you've got something which needs to be up 24/7, then actually committing to reserved instances over a 1 year or a 3-year period can massively reduce from that pay-as-you-go cost down to what we see savings-wise. So depends on the virtual machine SKU, but roughly in the region of about 30% or 50% as you go down for 1 year or 3-year commitment. Okay. In fact, for those who are looking at Azure VMware Service as a very fast target to migrate into, then I believe we can still do 5 years on that as well. Which also incorporates all the licensing costs in that space as well. Okay, so a number of things you can do for that. The other thing you can do is you can reuse some of your licenses. So if you have got Windows Server or Windows SQL Server licenses for what you have on premises, and you have software assurance, or you buy software insurance, then you can reallocate those with something called Azure Hybrid Benefit to then basically reduce down the price of your SQL servers or your Windows Server VMs. So effectively, they cost the same as when you take out the license element from that. So taking a virtual machine as an example, your Windows Server virtual machines cost more than, say, a Linux Ubuntu virtual machine. But if you have Azure Hybrid Benefit applied, then it brings that down. So combining Azure Hybrid Benefit and reserved instances is a sensible way of making sure that you are getting some real good cost optimization before you look at things like quotas and other areas as well. Okay, and there are other things to bear in mind as well. So some of you might have some older systems in place. So if you do have some Windows Server 2012 or SQL 2012, 2014, then these will be systems which will be subject to extended security updates, and there's an additional license cost for that, for how you're managing that on premise. Easier to manage if you're using Azure Arc, which I mentioned earlier. But if you move it into Azure, if you have it so it goes into Azure Native or onto Azure VMware Service, then you can get the extended security updates for free for a few years after the end of life date. Okay, so again, other things which are in play to help you achieve some savings. There's also something else called Savings Plan, which can apply more widely at a lower level to a wider set of services as well. So again, things that we can use with you to help you with cost optimization before you get into the procedural stuff about how you manage your environment. Okay. All right, we're going to finish up on security in the last 10 minutes before we have a couple of closeout slides. So having talked about cost, and if you've got any questions about cost, please do post those. But if you want to just use that QR code, and we'll pull out the security priorities for the organization and see if there's anything specific there which is concerning you. And if it isn't concerning you, then it should be. I like these slides because it gives me an opportunity to get a sip of water. Yeah, you're not the only organisation we talked about Cyber Essentials Plus recently. So obviously Cyber Essentials itself is something you self-audit, so that's one level. But moving to Cyber Essential Plus, where you get audited, is a bit of a step up. So yes, being able to use the Azure policy initiatives around that is definitely going to help you on that path. It's not merely a question of just using that initiative and this job done. There's obviously a lot more around Cyber Essentials Plus than that, but it will certainly assist you in getting there. Security strategy generally, there is a whole host of recommendations around security. This is one of the major focuses from Microsoft has been for years, to be honest, but in terms of the future for security and how that looks, particularly when you're working on cloud. And we've got some really strong guidance around what that security strategy looks like if you need assistance in focus on that. And we do security reviews for customers, for those who want to go deeper in that space. So going beyond what you do with just Defender for Cloud and making use of the tooling correctly, but actually getting to a deeper security, procedures and pen testing and that aspects, then we have some work we can do in that space as well. Okay. All right, so there's two. Okay, just persuade it to move on. There we go. All right. So we're going to cover a couple of different things here. We're going to return to governance because governance and security do work hand in hand together. So security is a team responsibility. Okay, so we say that because it's a mixture of Microsoft, quite commonly ourselves as third party. There might be other third party providers also engaged in providing security, but also what you do in house. So again, coming back to that cloud operating model, split responsibility, who does what. But in terms of really instilling security and driving that in is really understanding what the risks are, how to protect yourself from those risks. So going to a zero trust model, making use of identity, strong identity is absolutely key. You'll see this being ramped up in other places. So recently, MFA is now enforced for Azure Portal access, and we're expecting that to be further enforced as we move into different ways of accessing the system. So that will become ever more stringent in the way that works, but also how you then configure systems and protect it. So this is a continually moving field in terms of applying the recommendations and protecting against new and interesting attack vectors that we see coming from all the different cybersecurity attacks that come through. So there's a number of different things, and obviously you'll have certain systems which will be externally available and they'll be more exposed. So how do you protect those properly from networking, from security perspective, from design, and also from, if you assume breach, how do you protect it so there's no lateral movement as well? So these are different things that come into play when you want to make sure that you're operationalizing and you're designing security into how you work. Some of that is governance. So governance on what you do with identity access, obviously everything if you look from the intra-ID perspective and how you work with that, and conditional access and some of the reporting around that and how that feeds into it helps start there, because identity tends to be the first port of call for security when you're working with cloud systems. Working with how you then configure your core networking, your well-architected applications, baking security into those, making sure the governance guardrails are automating that and preventing you from doing the wrong things and gating, helping you to do the right things is a key part of that. Operations is really key as well. In fact, we're doing this ourselves in terms of how we work with customers and how we access customer environments. How do we reduce down our standing level of access and work with elevatable roles so we can do privileged identity management in different scenarios depending on how we access customer environments and how we manage those for customers. How do we make use of systems linked together? So somebody talked about integration earlier. So how do you make use of things like OpenID Connect and federated workload credentials when you're working with systems which are distributed between different platforms? So making sure that those things are done in the right way to limit the attack surface, to limit the splash zone, if you like, if something happens, and making sure you've got the ability to detect something and recover from those kind of attacks is absolutely key. And compliance. So you mentioned about Cyber Essentials Plus. We are seeing much more regulatory requirements in terms of what is required around compliancy. So how do you prove that you're achieving that? How do you get that compliancy requirement? How do you pass any auditing that happens at that level? How do you report on it? How do you keep up with changes to it as these things move forward and get updated over time? That's a big part of that. So we can help you with those. Okay. So the Cloud Adoption Framework helps you with adopting a stronger security posture and also continuously improving that security posture. So how do you keep on reflecting on that? So again, feeding in access control, security operations, asset protection we talked about earlier, security governance and innovation security. These are the 5 security disciplines that were on the previous slide. How does that look in terms of risk insights? How does that look in terms of security integration and operational resiliency? So it comes down to operational processes. It comes into structures around how you do role-based access control and apply that to how it works in terms of how you authenticate into systems and then what authority you have, what authorization you have once you get access into those. How do you make sure that the right assets are protected in the right way? So there's a whole ream of things. It's not one individual thing. It's a multifaceted approach to making sure that your end state is there and you are constantly appraising it. So looking at that security score, looking at your security posture and seeing what's next to be done to make sure you're continuously improving that situation is really key. Okay, all right. So I think I've just about kept this to around about the right time, which is good. If there's any other key questions we want to cover as part of this, then happy to take those now in the last few minutes. But if not, just want to draw your attention to the timings for the next 2 sessions. So session 2 will be about modernization. That's going to be about looking at data applications and how you're looking at making sure that you've got a well-governed set of data within the cloud and how you're going to approach that. So that's on Wednesday, the 7th of August. Again, it's going to be recorded, but we'd love to see you then. Like the fact that so many of you have actually pitched in and given us input for this session has really helped me to make sure it's being positioned correctly. And then we've got the follow-on one for innovation, which is going to be a fortnight after that one on Wednesday, the 21st of August. So as you start moving into implementing an AI strategy and making use of analysis for that data, what does that look like? How do you surface those insights? How do you get access to the right things? How do you get AI to make use of that data platform? So a number of different things there. Right, so we're going to close that now, but I'm just going to actually hand over to Stuart. Is there something you want to come on and say just to help finish up?
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to say thanks a million. That was one of the best kind of overviews in terms of being so well rounded and everything covered in such a short space of time. It's very hard to articulate the whole breadth of everything, but you've done it. So yeah, thanks again. And then just to go back on the point of engaging and early with us on Cloud Direct, and the faster that we can get in and look at the estate, the quicker we can help kind of create a business case. So the funding part is straightforward and easy. It's mapping out those workloads and getting to a position of a statement of work is the main piece that you need to cover. But yeah, thanks again, much appreciated, and that was brilliant.
Thank you. Hopefully you all found that useful. It's giving some insights as to how we approach adopting the cloud and what's going to be important for you to be successful. If you've got any follow-on questions, feel free to pass those through. On the next slide, if you take that QR code, there's Eric in the middle there, then that'll give you the link through to emailing Jess. So if you've got any follow-on questions, particularly around the funding or what you want to do next, we'd like to hear your next steps. So let's see how that looks. And don't forget to attend the next sessions as well as you look into the data governance, as you look into shaping access to your data and really leveraging the value of that data by moving through into AI and the analytics on top of that platform as well. So thank you for taking an hour and a half out of your days. Hope that's been useful for you. And yeah, please reach out to Jess and we'll move forward from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.